Many people don't know that in Italy you can purchase a property and own a real estate property without paying any property tax. Exactly, there is a way in Italy to don't pay any property tax and to have a huge fiscal ease on the registration tax, which is the tax that you pay when you are buying the property, at the moment you are buying the property. This doesn't mean, of course, that the purchase is for free, and in this video we are going to cover all the expenses you need to consider when you want to buy a property in Italy. I'm Jacopo and I'm the founder of Valente Italian Properties, which is an Italian real estate agency that helps foreign buyers to invest in Italy and to manage their property in this country. If you need my help, you can contact my team. You find everything you need in the description of this video. The first expense you need to consider is the real estate agency. As in many countries in the world, also in Italy we have real estate agents, and I'm one of them. In Italy, the agent is paid by both the parties, so the buyer and the seller. And this is different, for example, on what you can find in other countries, for example, United States. The average fee of a real estate agent is 3-4% from the buyer, 3-4% from the seller. There is no fixed price, but the percentage is a deal between the real estate agent and the client. My advice is that you want to buy property in Italy and you choose your real estate agent, you need to make a written agreement on the fee that you will buy at the real estate agent when the deal is closed. The second expense is the registration of the preliminary contract. In Italy, to purchase a property, you have two fundamental steps. The first is the preliminary contract, where you are not really the owner at that moment, but is a contract that obliges the seller to sell and the buyer to buy that property at certain conditions. After the preliminary contract, usually few months after the preliminary contract, there is the final deed, which is made in front of the notary, and is the moment where actually the property passes from the seller to the buyer. So when you sign a preliminary contract, you are obliged to register that paper at the fiscal agency. The registration cost is 200 euros plus 16 euros for every 4 pages or 100 lines of contract. So if you are going to register a contract of 4 pages, you need to pay 200 euros plus 16, so 216 euros. When you register the preliminary contract, you need also to advance a small part of the registration tax that you will pay at the final deed. So you will pay at the registration of the preliminary contract 0.5% of the deposit. This amount is not really a cost in that moment because it will be discounted from the taxes that you are going to pay at the notarial deed. Usually the registration comes with no additional cost from the real estate agency, so the real estate agency is obliged to register the contract and you will have to pay just the cost, let's say, of the registration without any compensation, without any fees from the real estate agency, because this service is included in the fee that you have to pay for the deal. So the 3-4% that we were speaking before. So now let's say you reach the notarial deed, so you are at the end point of your purchase. In this moment you have to pay the bigger amount of taxes of the purchase, which is different if you are buying with first home tax release or not. So if you are buying with first home tax release, you will pay 2% of the cadastral value as a registration tax. The cadastral value is not the purchase value, usually is really different, because the cadastral value is calculated by the fiscal agency just to apply taxes. Usually in Italy, the cadastral value is lower than the purchase value. This is true especially in the center and northern Italy, while in the southern Italy it can happen that the cadastral value is higher than the purchase value. So let's assume you are buying a property with 300,000 euros of cadastral value, you will pay with the first home tax release 6,000 euros of taxes. If you're not going to use the first home tax release, and maybe we are going to make a video on if it's convenient and if you can use this tax release, if you're not going to use it anyway, the taxes are much higher. The registration tax, for example, is 9% of the cadastral value. Just to be clear, the percentage of the registration tax can be calculated also on the price of the purchase. So for example, you are buying a property which is 500,000 euros of the purchase value and 300,000 euros as cadastral value. You can also choose to pay the taxes on the purchase value, but this is usually not convenient because the cadastral value, as we said before, is lower. There is another point to calculate the taxation on cadastral value, because if you are going to calculate the taxation on the purchase value, you can be subject to control of the Italian fiscal agency that can control if the purchase value is fair and if you pay the fair amount of taxes. If you are paying instead on the cadastral value, you will have no problem from the fiscal agency in the future. Here is another small difference. If you are buying as a private person, so as a physical person, what we said before is completely true. Instead, if you are buying as a company, you have to pay the registration tax only on the purchase value. So for you, it's not possible to pay on the cadastral value. This made for the company a bit more risky to buy a property in Italy, to have a control from the fiscal agency. But if you are clear and you are going to declare the right price that you are paying for the property, then for you everything will be okay. Another special case is if you are buying the property from a construction company. So if you are buying a property from a construction company that built in the last 5 years, you need to consider that you are not going to pay that amount of registration tax. The registration tax become fixed and is 200 euros, so much less, but you are paying VAT. So you will pay VAT on the purchase value, which is usually higher than the registration tax. If you are buying with first home tax release, you will pay 4% of VAT on the purchase value. Instead, if you are buying a second home, so you don't have the first home tax release, you will pay 10% on the purchase value. Another situation is when you buy a luxury property in Italy, and in this case VAT is 22%. So what usually happens in Italy when you want to purchase a really expensive property is that you actually made the transaction buying a company and not the real estate property. So the company owns the real estate and the taxes are really lower than purchasing real estate, but this will be for another video. Other small taxes are the mortgage tax and the cadastral tax, which are 50 euros each if you're buying with the first home, or 200 euros each if you are not buying with first home tax release. Of course, also the notary have his fee, and the fee change a lot depending on the price. So if you compare the fee of the notary with the price of the purchase, if the purchase is lower, you will pay more in percentage. If the purchase has a higher price, the fee of the notary will be lower in percentage. To make an example, if you are going to buy a property of 1 million euros, you can pay something around 6 or 7 or 8,000 euros for the notary. And the notary fees are usually paid by the buyer. On top of these costs, you could have the cost of a mortgage, of a loan that you need to buy the property, but this will be again a discussion for another video. Now let's make an example of a purchase of 1 million euros of an Italian villa. What's the cost you will have to pay? Let's say you are going with the first home tax release. So what you will pay is 200 euros plus 16 euros for the registration of the preliminary contract, 2% of the cadastral value. Let's say the cadastral value is 500 euros, just to give a price, and so the registration tax will be 10,000 euros. Then you will have to pay, let's say, 4% of the purchase price to the real estate agent, so 40,000 euros, plus VAT which in Italy on the real estate fees is 22%. So the total fee of the agency will be 48,800 euros, including VAT. Then you have to pay the notary, so let's say 7,000 euros, and another 100 euros for the mortgage and the cadastral tax. This means that at the end of the deal, you had paid around 66,000 euros to purchase your new villa in Italy of 1 million euros of value. This means that you have 6-7% of cost on the purchase value if you're going for the first home tax release. Instead, if you're not using tax release, you can go between 10-12%, sometimes 15% of the purchase value. I hope this video will be useful for you and for your Italian real estate project. And remember to subscribe to this channel to be updated on new videos and new arguments that we will discuss in the future. And I hope to meet you in the next video. Bye.